the 4 disruptions from McKinsey and Company that I discussed in another module as breaking all the trends and evaluating the powerful changes in the world economy suggest that our assumptions, tendencies, and habits have lost much of their relevance. Our intuition about how things work was formed by a set of experiences and ideas during a time when changes were incremental and somewhat predictable. But now we need to realize that much of what we think we know about how the world works is wrong. And we need to get a handle on the disruptive forces transforming the global economy and most of our local economies as well. There is an urgent imperative to adjust to these new realities. Yet for all our ingenuity, inventiveness, and imagination, we tend to be slow to adapt to change. We tend to want the future to look much like the recent past, but of course it isn't. So during the rest of this module, I will provide ideas about how to create and move into a new and successful future. At the beginning of every new year, executives have to turn their attentions to ensuring success within a new set of disruptions and innovations. They must prepare their teams to be sure-footed amidst uncertainty regarding economic conditions, new sources of competition, geopolitical tensions, and technological developments. They need their organizations to be confident, nimble, and relentless in their shared commitment to excel. As Eric McNulty of the global consulting firm PwC indicates, business today is too fast-moving and complex for top-down directives or new organizational structures to successfully achieve the necessary adaptive responses. Instead, McNulty suggests that leaders must master the duality of focus and agility. That is, he says, there must be unity up, down, and across the organization on shared objectives, along with great flexibility to seize opportunities and to overcome obstacles. The leader's job is achieving and maintaining clarity around purpose, values, and performance. It is about constantly looking for dissonance and fostering robust channels for real-time, multi-directional feedback and communication. The other half of this formula is to ensure agility, which is being able to adapt to your circumstances without losing forward momentum. It is often talked about, but rarely achieved, because most organizations are infused with assumptions, processes, and structures that are legacies from a past built on stability, standardization, and control. Yet today's operational context is much more dynamic and transparent. Agile organizations today are continually getting smarter and faster at the same time, and that requires more dispersed knowledge creation, insight sharing, and decision making. Surveys by TWC found that employees, particularly millennials, who are today's largest cohort of workers, say that connections to their coworkers and team collaboration are the strongest factors that contribute to their having a deeper sense of engagement at work. Connections and team interactions are critical to building trust, and they are essential components of agility because employees act more nimbly when they know what is expected of them and what to expect of others. When employees trust their colleagues and managers, they learn better how to read cues and sense subtle shifts in their environments, making it easier to adapt or intervene as necessary, and making it much more likely that they will not resign to go find these factors somewhere else. To show another example, in contrast to the preparation of athletes, organizations must balance many different kinds of priorities to compete. Yet at the same time, they face much more uncertainty than, say, a champion athlete competing to win major races. A race is a well-defined event. For athletes, the location, starting time, distance, competitors, and design of the track are all known in advance. However, the playing field of business is much less clear. The lack of clarity of the organizational environment is having a profound impact on the effectiveness of traditional management strategies. In the past, good strategy was based on using solid data and analysis to build an understanding of your current situation, to figure out a desired future position, and then to design a plan to get from here to there. At least this approach used to work. But today, the business world is changing so quickly that predicting what the marketplace will look like in the future is becoming increasingly difficult. The key elements for success today are not plans and aspirations, but agility and capabilities. Capabilities, or access to capabilities, are required to compete effectively in a given situation, and agility is required to make shifts in that position in response to a changing environment. At IMD, one of Europe's top business schools, they define this type of agility as being composed of what they refer to as digital business agility, which is composed of three things: hyper-awareness, informed decision-making, and fast execution. Hyper-awareness is a company's ability to detect and monitor changes in its environment, and not only in its own environment, but in the environment of every organization. Informed decision-making is an organization's ability to make the best decisions possible in a given situation, based on the quality of its data and information, analyzed, scaled, packaged, and distributed in a very transparent way throughout the organization. And informed decisions create value only to the extent that they can be implemented. Fast execution is an organization's ability to carry out its plans quickly and effectively. This requires the capability to execute quickly and a willingness to experiment and a tolerance for failure. As Michael Wade of Cisco and IMD describes it, the ability to be agile, to sense changes and opportunities, to decide how to respond, and to act quickly will replace strategy as a key driver of organizational success in the future. Research at McKinsey & Company verifies how important agility is. They define agility as the combination of speed and stability. And this combination turns out to be a surprisingly strong predictor of organizational health and ultimately of performance. Of course, no one would expect sluggish companies to thrive. And it's equally reasonable to assume that success achieved through breakneck speed without stabilizing processes and structures would be hard to sustain over the long term. So McKinsey's research confirms that speed and stability pull in the same direction, that they support each other, and together they support organizational success. It is significant that all 37 of the management practices that McKinsey tracks and evaluates for their organizational clients generated better outcomes in those organizations' respective dimensions of organizational health when combined with high measures of their speed and stability. In 4 of the 37 management practices, financial management, financial incentives, capturing external ideas, and involving employees in shaping a company's vision, speed and stability had a particularly striking impact. Given the striking outperformance of the agile companies, additional analysis identified 10 management practices that differentiated the most agile and thus the most successful companies. From most important to least, and yet all 10 were important, these practices included role clarity, top-down innovation, capturing external ideas, process-based capabilities, operationally disciplined, internally competitive, meaningful values, knowledge sharing, inspirational leaders, and people performance review. Using these factors to help find the most innovative and successful organizations, consultants have found that today, innovation is often found where you least expect it. For example, in places like China, India, or even in Africa. To illustrate this point, Konstantinos Markides of the London Business School indicates companies located in developing countries are currently serving billions of local customers with innovative and inexpensive products and services. The question for developed markets is what will happen when these companies make the leap to developed markets? How disruptive will these innovations be, and will developed market firms learn from these innovations and innovators quick enough to benefit from these learnings? So, if disruptive innovation is so important, how do you organize for these breakthrough or disruptive innovations? The theory of disruptive innovation, introduced by Christensen, Rayner, and McDonald in Harvard Business Review in 1995, has proved to be a powerful way of thinking about innovation-driven growth. Many leaders of small entrepreneurial companies praise it as their guiding star. So do many executives in large, well-established organizations. Unfortunately, as its creators discussed in a recent issue of HBR, disruption theory is in danger of becoming a victim of its own success, as the many articles and stories published in the last 20 years on this topic illustrate. The authors explained that many researchers, writers, and consultants use disruptive innovation to describe any situation in which an industry is shaken up and previously successful incumbents stumble. But that's too broad a usage. The term disruptive innovation is misleading when it is used to refer to a product or service at one fixed point, rather than to the evolution of that product or service over time. Most every innovation, disruptive or not, begins life as a small experiment. Disruptors tend to focus on getting the business model, rather than merely the product or service, just right. When they succeed, their movement from the fringe, the low end of the market, or from a new market, to the mainstream erodes first the incumbent's market share and then their profitability. This process will take time, and incumbents can get quite creative in the defense of their established franchises, which will typically lead to forestalling too long the move to the new products and business model. Indeed, the fact that disruption can take time helps to explain why incumbents frequently overlook disruptors altogether. The problem with equating a disruptive innovation with any breakthrough that changes an industry's competitive patterns is that different types of innovation require different strategic approaches. To put it another way, the lessons the authors have learned about succeeding as a disruptive innovator or defending against a disruptive challenger will not apply to every company in a shifting market. So even though I have used disruptive innovation as an idea that impacts everyone and needs to be continually assessed and reacted to, it is evident that the degree of impact varies and the strategies for reaction must vary as well. The job of management does not get easier just because we have some terminology to describe the new environment. To be more specific about what the creators of the concept consider a disruptive innovation, first, they say that disruptive innovations originate in low-end or new market footholds, not just anywhere or everywhere. And secondly, disruptive innovations don't catch on with mainstream customers until quality catches up to the customer's standards. Therefore, disruption is a process, not a specific event. Disruptors often build business models that are very different from those of incumbents. Thus, it doesn't help to try to merge a disruptor strategy with your own or to necessarily copy a disruptor's strategy. And some disruptive innovations succeed, some don't. The mantra, "disruptor be disrupted," can misguide us. Incumbent companies should not overreact to disruption by dismantling a still profitable or healthy business. Instead, they should strengthen relationships with core customers while also creating a new division focused on the growth opportunities that arise from the disruption. My wife's a librarian. Almost daily, she comes home talking about, maybe complaining about, some new disruption to her library, or to all libraries, presented by a new technology or a new application of an existing technology. Let me use libraries as an example to help us understand what I have been presenting in this module. Recently, my wife, her name is Georgia, brought home an article about a keynote presentation by Steve Denning to 2 professional librarian organizations at conferences being held in Washington, D.C. Mr. Denning started by stating the obvious, at least obvious to some people, and hopefully many librarians, certainly obvious to my wife, Georgia, and that was that libraries everywhere are under threat. After all, who needs a library today when it's possible, without even getting out of bed, to find and read almost any book or article that has ever been published? As Mr. Denning continued, my thoughts on the future of libraries are equally applicable to many other sectors that are facing the threat of extinction from massive disruption to their businesses. After Mr. Denning describes the many revolutionary product and service changes that are occurring everywhere and their impacts on libraries, he applies all this to libraries. But it's a story for all organizations. So I'll describe Mr. Denning's summary of his view of the future for libraries. So Mr. Denning continues, the future of libraries, as well as the future of your organization, is a story that has yet to be written. The only thing we know for sure is that the story will be different from the story of the past. And the key to unlocking the mystery of the future requires asking the right questions. The first and most important question to ask for libraries as well as the rest of us is, how can we delight our users and customers? Answering it requires all the capabilities and ingenuity of our staffs. Libraries and you will be unable to answer it if they continue to be run as vertical bureaucracies focused on producing outputs. In that form, libraries simply won't have the agility or the institutional smarts to figure out what users really want and then deliver it. This recognition leads to the second question. How can we manage the library to enable continuous innovation? This will involve a shift to the management practices of the creative economy, including the shift in the role of managers from controllers to enablers. The shift in coordinating work from bureaucracy and counting outputs to agile approaches to coordination and assessing the outcomes. The shift in values from efficiency to continuous improvement, and the shift in communications from top-down command and control to horizontal communications. The third question is, what will make things better, faster, cheaper, more mobile, more convenient, or more personalized for users? Changes that make things better for the library, but make things worse for users, are not the answer. The fourth question to ask is, what needs could libraries meet that users haven't yet even thought of? We can't solve the mystery of the future of an organization by asking its users what they want. They simply don't know. They can't imagine the possibilities. Once they see the possibilities, they can say, yes, I must have that. So libraries must imagine a future that users will truly want, even though users themselves don't yet know what that is. And this inquiry into what users really want leads to a fifth set of questions. What are the things that your organization is currently doing that users already love? How can you do more of those things and do them sooner, better, faster, and in a more convenient, more personalized way? And how can libraries stop doing things that users don't value or that even annoy them? And even further, how can libraries welcome, maybe even create, new technologies that will change the answers to all of these questions? In other words, libraries and your organizations may not have to invent the future, they may be able to discover it. The future is already here, as the science fiction writer William Gibson said. It is just very unevenly distributed. And as Mr. Denning concluded, we can also draw on the wisdom of French novelist Marcel Proust. The real voyage of discovery consists not in seeking new landscapes, but in having new eyes. We have to recognize the future that is already unfolding in front of us. What we need are eyes to see it. The collision of the four fundamental global forces described in this module, urbanization, technology, demographics, and globalization, is producing monumental change. Global competition and technological change have sped up creative destruction and outpaced the ability of organizations and labor markets to adapt. Job creation is a critical challenge for most policymakers, and even as businesses complain about critical skill gaps. Graying populations are starting to fray social safety nets, and for debt-ridden societies and advanced economies, to say nothing about debt-ridden emerging market economies, the challenge can only get more pressing as the cost of capital starts to rise. Much-needed productivity growth continues to elude both the private and public sectors. Income equality is rising and causing a backlash, in some cases targeted at the very interconnections of trade, finance, and people that have fueled the growth of the past 3 decades. And just as many businesses are being forced to reassess their strategies and reimagine their assumptions, governments must also do the same. Even though many, if not most, central management ideas came from the last century and seem relatively timeless, what isn't timeless, however, is context. Economic, social, and competitive dynamics, which are on high boil, are altering businesses with breathtaking speed and drama. So, how do you manage in a world that just gets more complex? Given that the world is constantly changing, it makes sense that the appetites for advice on conducting business is only growing. Now more than ever, regardless of the context in which they operate or the way in which they consume it, people and their organizations need what business schools, consulting firms, and business publications offer, as well as programs like this one from ITC, vetted insights from proven experts. After all, as Amy Bernstein, editor of the Harvard Business Review, remarks, the smartest management ideas find order in seeming chaos, make the future a little easier to see, and enable us to steer large numbers of people in one direction to achieve remarkable results. When the competitive landscape is shifting, leaders have to figure out which rules apply so they can navigate their organizations toward success. In addition, they must recognize that one of the greatest impacts of globalization involves the sheer scale of the changes we face today. As what I have said today suggests, and has been expressed by the many experts, consulting firms, and business magazines that I've referred to, the future of business, education, government, and civil society is pure chaos and disruption. So, let me end with this. 150 years ago, Charles Darwin said that it isn't the strongest that survive, nor is it the most intelligent. It is the one that is most adaptable to change. That was a great perspective 150 years ago, and it's a great perspective now. Thank you.